I attacked the orc with my axe!
That's a 1.
A 1? Well, let's see. It looks like you hit the rogue in the face with your axe.
Hey, what the heck? That's not cool.
Oh, that's awesome! That's good. You take dead damage.
That's not how that works, you moron.
That's perfect. And now for the wizard.
It would appear to be time to go.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be back.
Hey, you just killed Gary.
Well, he shouldn't have been standing there.
Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Luke Hart, and I've been a Dungeon Master since high school. On this channel, I give practical Dungeon Master advice that you can implement at your game table. Today in the Lair, we're going to continue our little discussion about critical fumbles that I began in my 10 Worst House Rules Ever video about a month ago. Yes, that's about how long it takes to plan, script, film, and edit a follow-up video. So sue me. You see, in that video, I claimed that critical fumbles are one of the worst house rules ever, hence why I mentioned them in that video. However, I got a crap ton of comments from people saying their groups love critical fumbles. So I figured, since a lot of people got all worked up about that, I would capitalize on the anger of the internet and double down on my original assertion. Now what I'm going to do here is first delve a little deeper into the failing of critical fumbles, and then I'm going to discuss several ways I think Dungeon Masters can make critical fumbles more interesting and less heavy-handed in their games. In other words, we're going to talk about how to do critical fumbles the right way. Okay, that probably sounds like a pretty egotistical and closed-minded statement right there. But you want to know what I really think? If your players are having tons of fun suffering the ill effects of heavy-handed critical fumble tables that result in things like losing legs, getting permanently blinded, and any other multitude of effects that basically doom them to worthless characters, then you shouldn't be listening to me. Your players are having fun, getting maimed, and all that jazz. Just keep doing your thing. You're good. But there are lots of players who don't particularly enjoy it, so it behooves a Dungeon Master to understand why. Oh, and to be clear, let's define what I'm talking about when I say critical fumbles suck. I'm talking about the horrible critical fumble tables that are kicking around out there. I have no problem whatsoever with an attack roll of a natural 1 being an automatic miss. This is not even a house rule. This is part of the core game rules. What I do not like personally is when that natural 1 becomes something much more horrible, such as what results when the DM rolls on a heavy-handed critical fumble table. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, the idea of critical fumbles are rather illogical considering other game mechanics. Let's take a look at the career of a fighter. At first level, Jim Bob can attack 1 time in 6 seconds, which is about how long a round lasts. So there is a 5% chance that he has a critical fumble and screws up bad. As Jim Bob adventures and gets more experience and gets better as a fighter, he gets more attacks. He gets 2, 3, even 4 attacks in the same 6 seconds or 1 round, which means he now has 5% chances to have a critical fumble and screw up really bad. So you're telling me that the better Jim Bob gets as a fighter, the more often he's going to screw up royally in the same span of time? There's something that just seems a little bit off about that. And now, if the Dungeon Master decides to roll on a table full of horrible results each time Jim Bob rolls a natural 1 on an attack roll, well, Jim Bob is getting doubly punished for getting better as a fighter. At that point, Jim Bob is wondering why he even bothered leveling up, and he also might be getting a little bit jealous of Tiffany. You see, Tiffany is a wizard, and when Tiffany casts spells, some of them require attack rolls, which could result in critical fumbles, but many of them, perhaps even the majority of them, don't. Instead, the enemies make saving throws with 0 chance of critical fumbles, which trigger the Dungeon Master to roll on those heavy-handed tables. So Jim Bob, the fighter, is left wondering why he is unfairly targeted with this game mechanic, and why Tiffany, the wizard, doesn't have to put up with it nearly as much. In fact, Jim Bob might propose to the Dungeon Master that when Tiffany casts a spell requiring a saving throw, something like this might apply. When a creature rolls a natural 20 on the saving throw, that's the equivalent of a critical fumble for Tiffany. So, when Tiffany casts Fireball and that group of goblins, and 3 of them roll natural 20s, well, Tiffany gets to suffer the effects of 3 rolls on their critical fumble table. I mean, Jim Bob would probably argue that's pretty fair considering what he has to put up with. In common language, the issue is this. Critical fumbles don't affect all classes equally. And unless the Dungeon Master creates house rules to correct that, it's not fair to all the players. Simply put, it gives some players the shaft while others get off scot-free. And that's not cool. However, that's not all. You also really need multiple critical fumble tables that are customized for the different classes and make sense for them. Now, why is that? Well, if the result on a table is that the PC drops their sword, that doesn't really make much sense if the PC is a wizard, now does it? And you know what? I bet those tables already even exist. I bet there are people that have 20 different critical fumble tables that they use depending on the class and perhaps, in the case of spellcasters, the type of spell they cast. And I gotta ask, at that point, does the additional complexity that using multiple critical fumble tables adds to the game really worth the benefit that you get from them? Every additional rule, every table, every die roll slows the game down. And worse, it slows the game down in the part of the game that most struggles from slowness. Combat. I mean, there are entire videos and blog posts and perhaps even books written about how to speed combat up. And here we are, stabbing ourselves in the feet with critical fumble charts. Why do we do this to ourselves, fellow Dungeon Masters? Now, if I still haven't managed to convince you that critical fumble tables might not be the best idea, then just leave your angry comment down below and keep using them. Actually, the fact is that critical fumble tables might not be all that bad under certain circumstances. Now, you still gotta fix the problems that I've already mentioned, but I could see some situations where they could work fairly well. First, there are different types of D&D games. You got high fantasy, horror, mystery, and other types, and somewhere in that list is a gritty style game. A game that strives to be more realistic and uncompromising, where the characters might not be heroes so much as people striving against colossal odds in an attempt to just stay alive. I could see critical fumble tables being useful in games like this because they help reinforce that gritty style of game. Or if your critical fumble tables are not heavy-handed and the consequences in them are trivial and meant purely to introduce flavor and perhaps humor into the game, then that could be tons of fun. Now I imagine just about now you're either a bit confused or angry that I just did a 180 on you. Like, Luke, how can you spend several minutes pissing and moaning that critical fumbles and tables for them are bad and then turn around and say that they can be good? Well, you're just gonna have to accept that not everything in life is black and white, I guess. And perhaps leave me an angry comment down below. But let me emphasize once again that critical fumbles still have problems that should be addressed before using critical fumble tables, even if they might be good for the game. Okay, now what I'm going to do is mention a few ideas for improving critical fumbles in the game. Now, these are not fully fleshed out ideas. I don't have play-tested systems for them or anything. They're just ideas. Take them for what you will, and if something appeals to you, feel free to flesh it out and run with it at your game. And if you do, and it works well, please come back and let me know. Number 1, press your luck. You can allow your players to press the boundaries of what their characters are capable of, and have a critical fumble associated with it if they fail. The important part to this, however, is that the consequence for a critical fumble should be equal or less than the action they are attempting to take. In other words, it should make sense. If a barbarian is attempting to create some slick new horseshoes, having her forge explode on a critical fumble is stupid. Instead, maybe she quenches the steel poorly and has to do them over again. Okay, so an example. A wizard wants to sculpt a fireball spell around his allies. The Dungeon Master asks him to make a DC 20 Arcana check to succeed, and says that if he fails by 5 or more, it will be considered a critical fumble. The wizard ends up rolling a 13 on his Arcana check, and they roll on a critical fumble chart, and there is a magical backlash. Not only do his companions take damage from the fireball, but the wizard suffers 2d6 psychic damage as well. Or a fighter wants to cleave through an enemy, essentially being able to attack more than one foe with an attack. The Dungeon Master says she needs to succeed on a DC 20 athletics check, and if she fails by 5 or more, it's a critical fumble. The fighter rolls a 12 and her sword gets stuck in the armor of the first enemy, requiring an action on her next turn to extract it. Or the fighter rolls a 22 and not only gets to attack the first enemy, but also one additional enemy with the same attack. I suggest being careful with these though. While perhaps interesting conceptually, they could introduce a bit of imbalance into the game. For instance, a fighter being able to attack twice for the price of one might be a bit much. Number 2. Critical fumble charts are only used when the PC has disadvantage on the attack. So on a straight attack roll, if I roll a 1, it's just a miss. However, if I have disadvantage on the roll and roll a 1 on one of the dice, then we also roll on a critical fumble chart. This has the advantage of making rolls on a critical fumble chart a more rare occurrence, but still has them be part of the game. It also serves to reflect realism more. If a PC already has disadvantage on an attack, they're already in a poor situation, and it makes more sense then for something really bad to happen if they roll a 1. Number 3, use critical fumble charts instead of disadvantage. You could do something like this. When a player has disadvantage on something, they could instead roll a single d20, but if they fail by 5 or more, it's considered a critical fumble. And then you roll on a chart to see what happens. I think the key here is giving your players the choice. Don't force it on them. They get to choose every time they have disadvantage. Maybe sometimes they'd prefer to have disadvantage, but other times they'd rather risk a roll on the critical failure chart. Let it be a player choice, not a dungeon master edict. Number 4, confirm critical fumbles before rolling on a chart. Now there is nothing super new about this idea. In previous editions, you had to confirm critical hits. If you rolled a natural 20 on an attack, you had to make it another attack roll against the enemy to see if the hit was really a critical hit. I'm not suggesting that exactly. Instead, if you roll a natural 1 on an attack, it's always a miss. That part doesn't change. However, you make a second attack roll, and if the result still misses the target's armor class, but it does not have to be a second natural 1, then you roll on a critical fumbles chart. So rolls on these charts are still part of the game, but they happen less often. Let me know down below if your group uses critical fumble tables and how angry this video made you. Next week, I'll be talking about how to use hirelings, followers, and the infamous DMPCs in games. But until then, click right here to watch my top 10 worst house rules video ever that kicked off this whole controversy. And until next time, let's play D&D.